Everyone, thank you for joining us today for this DOE USCA Consensus Program workshop on carbon conversion and utilization procurement grants for fuels, chemicals, and bioproducts. My name is Alex Krauka. I'm a Seattle-based consultant for USCA's Consensus Program. And for those of you who may not know, the Consensus Program is a cooperative agreement that we have with DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management that seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and other stakeholders and build a consensus on the benefits of and requirements for carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, and other carbon management technologies, such as carbon dioxide removal, methane emissions mitigation, rare earth, critical minerals, sustainable development, and the like. Pretty much everything that falls under the umbrella of FECM, we look to support them on. We do this through a series of activities, including briefings, workshops such as today's, reports that we put out throughout the year, and we also have a monthly news clips that we put out to help keep our stakeholders informed. If you'd like to subscribe to our mailing list, please email my colleague, Michelle Littlefield at mlittlefield@usca.org. Now, just a quick disclaimer of our work today. I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but this is up for posterity's sake, and this is being recorded, which I will discuss in just a moment. So as mentioned, just a quick note on logistics for today's meeting, as well as some ground rules. This meeting is being recorded, and we will plan to post the recording as well as the presentations on the event page. Because it is being, because it is a Zoom meeting, instead of a webinar, we do ask that everyone please mute themselves unless they're speaking, and please leave your camera turned off, just so we can avoid any bandwidth issues. However, we will encourage the use of cameras during the breakout sessions. Also, it should be noted that the meeting is being transcribed. That's for the purposes of summary report writing. Once we move into our breakout sessions, we will continue recording and transcribing. However, that will only be for summary report writing purposes. We do use a Chatham House rules type of breakout method. So we do not plan to attribute anyone's comments. We will just record what was said. And so we hope this encourages you to provide honest feedback during the breakouts. A quick note about the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. Again, I won't read through all these bullets. However, I do want to emphasize that this effort is not part of a federal advisory committee. We cannot provide advice nor drive towards consensus. We are simply here to gather information and get feedback, and that is the purpose of today's meeting. A quick look at the agenda. We do have a packed schedule, so I don't want to waste too much time with myself talking. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sheila Hollis, Acting Executive Director of the United States Energy Association. With that, Sheila, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Alex, and it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning, and we're greatly honored to see this array of supporters and friends and consultants who will be playing a major role in this program and have played a major role in it. It's something we're very dedicated to. It is emblematic of the other things that USCA does. But quickly, for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit, non-lobbying organization. We do none of those things. What we do is to convene, to get ideas out on a table, to share with the US government and with other governments the ideas, the creativity, the projects that are going to lead our country and the world going forward into a lower CO2, more environmentally sensitive, and yet capable of serving the needs of the people throughout the world with respect to energy. We've been around since about 1924, actually, and we have a long history of convening. Our board of directors is comprised of some of the national labs, a variety of trade association heads, educational institutions, and other nonprofits that convene. We in this process of convening and bringing people together to discuss ideas and creativity and meet the needs of the world for energy in a clean, available, affordable, and highly functioning and better way. So it is a pleasure to be with you here today. I know this project has been a tremendous effort. We're deeply grateful to the Department of Energy for its support and its input and the interaction that we've had with DOE and other players throughout the U.S. government and in the educational institutions and with other players. So it is a tremendous honor to be with you today. We would like it if you would look at more of what USCA does. We do a lot of other things that you may find useful. It's all free. All of the programs are free. And they're available at our website. You can see the huge variety of initiatives that we have undertaken over many, many years, including on issues like transmission, carbon capture, of course, better production of oil and gas, availability, and the like. We have input from the FERC, from DOE, from the Department of Interior, and other entities, as well as the educational institutions, trade associations, and a cross-section of industry and consumers. And regulators. So with that, we are delighted and honored to play a ongoing part in this initiative by DOE. And we deeply appreciate the intellectual firepower that's been brought to the table and will be shared with you here today. And also the really great idea of having our roundtables in our breakout rooms so the ideas can generate more great ideas and carry us forward. With that, I turn it back to you, Alex, and thank you again for letting me say a few words about DOE. And I'm going to stick around for as long as possible today to soak in all the ideas and sharing of those ideas and the path forward. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sheila. Happy to have you join us today and really appreciate you taking the time to do so. With that, our next speaker is Dr. Emily Grubert, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Carbon Management in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, to discuss a high-level overview of these virtual and regional meetings, as well as FECM strategic vision. So with that, Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. Hello, everybody. I'm Emily Grubert. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Carbon Management for another 8 days or so. So I will be rolling off close to the end of next week, and Noah Deitch will be taking over from me. So you'll be in capable hands, but you may see email responses from me directing you to talk to both of us for the next couple of weeks, and then Noah from then on. But it's my pleasure for the next 10 minutes or so to talk a little bit about fossil energy and carbon management, and specifically what we are looking to do. Alex, if you could enable my screen share, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, I can also just talk through it.
You should be able to share now.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you very much. All right, that coming through?
Yes.
All right, great. So when we think about just whatever we're really getting at here today, a lot of the priorities that we have in the Office of Carbon Management are related really to justice and sustainability in a way that I think we're really moving towards and trying to understand in a way that is actually enacted by our programs. So to kind of start out just with what we are trying to do, the overall Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, or FECM, joined we joined the phrase carbon management to the Office of Fossil Energy last July. So it's been about a year since we added this to our name. It's also the name of one of our offices, but I think the overall point is that a really high level vision of what we're trying to do here is to really think about the role of fossil and carbon management in the transition toward really lower carbon futures and eventually net zero futures. So we really look to President Biden's goals in determining what our overall pathway looks like. 50% emissions reduction by 2030 relative to a 2005 baseline, CO2 emissions-free power by 2035, which is coming up and is a huge priority for us, given that we've been investing in carbon capture and storage for power for the last 20 or 30 years. And then also a net zero emissions economy by no later than 2050. We're a research and development office. And so now, even though we are moving a little bit more into the demonstration space, we really try to think about where we need our technologies to be now in order to say whether they'll be available for us to use the way that we might want to in order to achieve these types of goals. So a lot of our role is really evaluating carbon management activities. Overall, within the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office, our mission is deep decarbonization and justice, and really trying to minimize the environmental and climate impacts of fossil fuels throughout their life cycle. When we think about carbon management in particular, a lot of the work that we really focus on is addressing the hardest to decarbonize applications in the electricity and industrial sectors. That looks like the last few percent probably of power, potentially. That looks like industrial capture where there aren't a lot of other options. So things like cement, steel, pulp and paper perhaps, but places where you're going to have a CO2 stream that's essentially fundamental to the process. And then really a lot of work on carbon dioxide removal, which is something that addresses emissions that we can't address in any other way. These are the emissions that are already in the atmosphere. So thinking about removal as another task where we have an evaluation role to see whether we can do this in a way that's both sustainable and just is a huge piece of how we operate. In thinking about priority technology areas across the full office, which is essentially two R&D organizations, the Office of Carbon Management, which I lead, and then the Office of Resource Sustainability, we have a number of areas that we're really trying to think through in getting to this overall mission. So on the carbon management side, we think about point source capture, we think about carbon dioxide removal. CO2 conversion into products is something to do with the CO2. Reliable CO2 storage also is something to do with the CO2. And I'll mention that the conversion and storage pieces are useful both for mitigation activities and for removal activities and are therefore a really important part of what we do. And then finally, hydrogen production as something that we can do from carbon-based feedstocks. Historically, in our office, that's looked like fossil, and we're moving toward really thinking about this as a way to use biomass or non-recyclable carbon-based wastes, and really trying to pay very close attention to those life cycle emissions as we think about what their role could be in deep decarbonization. Over in the Office of Resource Sustainability, we have a couple of other priority technology areas, really specifically focusing on critical mineral production from industrial and mining waste. We know there are a lot of opportunities to remediate past activities and also potentially produce something that we know is going to be critical to the clean energy economy, and then also methane mitigation. So as long as the natural gas system, the oil system, the coal system, and then a variety of other things that produce methane are active, really thinking very carefully about how we can address methane emissions quickly is a big priority in that office as well. Overall, this also really is embedded within an overall point of trying to enact justice and support legacy communities as well. So as we think about where our technologies could play a role, we also really want to think about the social context of how they're working. So it's not just, does the capture system work? It's what kinds of jobs do these create? Where are these projects? How are we making sure that people have access to being able to participate in what could be potentially fairly large industries, and particularly within the carbon dioxide removal space, where we know there's the potential for this to be quite large and it doesn't really exist yet. So really thinking about opportunities to find synergies with remediation, et cetera, is a big part of what we look at. So again, really thinking about deep decarbonization and environmental justice. And clearly, conversion is a big piece of that because it helps us think about not just a place to put CO2, but also a way to decarbonize a lot of supply chains, replace the types of carbon-based things that we have a hard time replacing otherwise, and things like this. Our vision for carbon management and kind of in general can also be found in the strategic vision document that we released in April. I won't go into this in great detail because it's very similar to what I was just talking about, but just wanted to mention to the people on the call that we do have this document available if you want to go read that. And it goes into quite a lot of detail in terms of each of our divisions and what our priorities are. The other thing that we're really, really working on in addition to our general appropriated program is supporting the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Depending on how you read it, of the $62 billion that came to the Department of Energy, somewhere between $10 and $14 billion of that is for carbon management explicitly. For FECM directly, we were apportioned $6.5 billion in carbon management funding over the next 5 years, in addition to some critical minerals and materials dollars that are really focused on rare earths. But what this looks like is the CDR portion of it, the direct air capture hubs, for which we received $3.5 billion to build 4 million ton scale hubs. a DAC technology prize competition focused on direct air capture. And then we also have $2.5 billion for carbon dioxide storage and another $310 million for carbon utilization that we're really thinking about from the perspective of conversion. We also have $100 million for front-end engineering design studies focused on CO2 transport associated with capture and storage. And then again, this critical minerals and materials piece that's directly to FECM. I know Melissa's going to talk in a minute, but we also support quite a bit of the work that's going on through the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OCED, which was established in December. And so specifically on carbon management pieces there's in the Hydrogen Hubs program, which is $8 billion, at least one of those projects is going to be fossil fuels with carbon management, which we've been advising on and supporting. Similarly, there's an integrated carbon capture demonstration and large pilots program. It's about $3.5 billion that we're supporting, and a financing program for carbon dioxide transportation infrastructure that's joint with the Loan Programs Office that we are also supporting. So lots and lots of work. It's been keeping us pretty busy. Then before I close and turn it over to Melissa, I know we wanted to make some time for questions. I really just wanted to emphasize that when we think about what the role of carbon management is in general, we're really trying to see where these technologies are actually appropriate and responsibly applicable to facilitating deep decarbonization. From our perspective, when we really look at the types of programs that we're trying to fund and really trying to encourage, some of the really big priorities that we have are things like reducing the cost of capture and also increasing the rate of capture. So, at some point when you're trying to actually run toward net zero, you don't really want to be thinking about 80% capture in a mitigation scenario. You want 98, 99, as close to 100% as you can get. So that's something that we've been working on quite a lot, not just in the power sector, but increasingly on industry. And then carbon dioxide removal is something where we recognize that if the goal is net zero, then that basically means you need to get as close to zero as you possibly can, and then use compensatory removal for the rest of it. You can't have a net zero that isn't actually zero unless you have some negative emissions. And so when we think about carbon dioxide removal, the goal there is really to facilitate that access to negative emissions pathways. These are brand new in a lot of ways, and so we've been thinking very carefully, not just about how you do it, but also how you verify it, how you monitor it, how you ensure that it's permanent, these types of things. We're also really focused on developing low carbon supply chains, largely through conversion. So taking CO2 and converting it into a valuable product, in addition to a lot of the storage that we do, but thinking about really opportunities for high volume applications like aggregates, but also really high value applications like fuels and chemicals or solid carbon products, where there's a way to not just put CO2 somewhere, but also actually decarbonize some supply chains that are difficult to decarbonize in other ways. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but when we really think about how our programs fit together, the conversion and storage are both for mitigation and removal. And so we spend a lot of time both on conversion, but then also on geologic storage to really think about what do you do with the CO2 once you have it, and what's the scale that we need to be doing this at. So our Carbon Safe program is really focused on developing the infrastructure for long-term geologic storage. And we think a lot about how we can optimize reservoirs, plan infrastructure, et cetera, to really facilitate longer-term mitigation and removal. With that, I'll stop with my overview and turn it back to Alex, and look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. We're going to hold off on questions for the moment and pass it over to Melissa in a second, but just want to say thank you for joining us today, as well as your leadership in the office's inclusion of justice and sustainability in its mission. It's been great working with you, and please don't be a stranger when you move on from FECM. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Melissa. I see that you are sharing your screen, and just want to flip the display settings there.
Oh, yeah. All right, I did this wrong. How do I flip this? Swap. There we go. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Clembera. I am acting as the Deputy Director for Portfolio Strategy in this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a high-level overview about what this new office is about, what we're working on. And there's a lot of, as Emily mentioned, we're coordinating and collaborating really closely with FECM on a lot of the carbon capture demos and pilots. As well as kind of future looking what other type of demonstration programs in this area we can coordinate and collaborate on. So you may already know this, but hopefully you do, because the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill was passed into law in November, and that really started a significant investment, $62 billion at the Department of Energy and really kind of kickstarted funding of this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, because we have about 21.5 billion in this new office. And I'll kind of break it down for you a little later, where all the different types of provisions within this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So you may already know this as well, but over this past kind of December, January timeframe, they reorganized the Department of Energy with an eye toward demonstration of deployment, given the significant funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill under a new Undersecretary for Infrastructure. So that's where the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations lives, along with the Grid Deployment Office, the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains, as well as a new Office of State and Community Energy Programs. So just wanted you to be aware that even though we're a new office under S3, we really are coordinating, collaborating closely with the set of offices under S4, such as FECM, who are the subject matter experts in these technologies, as we do the kind of design of these new programs. We're going to have that ongoing coordination, collaboration, even though we're in a separate kind of undersecretary pillar. Okay, so with this new bipartisan infrastructure bill, it really expanded our research and development into demonstration deployment and provided 21.5 billion into this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And so in this new office, we're trying to build off of, we do have a history here with doing demonstrations. I come from the Bioenergy Technology Office, where I managed nearly $1 billion portfolio and about 30 biorefinery projects at pilot, demo, and commercial scale. And so one of the benefits to having this as a separate kind of standalone office of clean energy demonstrations is that we can pull from that kind of history of having done demonstrations, put it all in one office, build kind of a center of excellence for the type of demonstrations, no matter what technology it is, very consistent project management oversight, and the type of due diligence we do on the front end during the projects, and the type of data that we're gathering from these projects once they're operational, to really build the confidence in the private sector that we really need them to continue to cost share these demos with us at 50-50 cost share, and catalyze additional type of debt equity type of financing that we're going to need to really reach these aggressive goals for net zero carbon-free electricity by 2035 and net zero economy by 2050. And so we know we're going to need, even though 21.5 billion sounds like a lot of money, we know we're going to need to really unlock trillions in financing in the clean tech sector. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about how we design these types of demonstration projects, so that we're really building that confidence in industry, utilities, regulators, whoever the key stakeholders are, communities, like Emily was pointing out. We're really being thoughtful about EJ40 and how we really get community acceptance of these projects and buy-in, and being transparent with the benefits that these types of projects can provide to, air, water, and other type of jobs in the local community that it can build out. And so we really want to kind of prove out these different technologies at the demonstration scale and kind of unlock that private sector capital, so that we continue to replicate these type of projects, whatever, if it's in, green hydrogen or carbon capture or long duration energy storage, and continue to kind of bridge that gap between R&D and successful commercialization. And so we want to also provide kind of a feedback loop from what we're learning in these demonstrations to the R&D side of the shop, so under S4 now, and continue to coordinate and collaborate on budget priorities and future demonstrations. So I'm really excited about this new set of programs, because we're really filling this gap between the R&D side and successful commercial demos, and having some consistent funding for all of the different kinds of technologies that we know that we need to invest in order to achieve these aggressive goals is really important going forward. Okay, so I covered the mission a little bit, and we really want to have an eye toward the private sector and kind of building the confidence there with what they want to see demonstrated And these are all new markets that we're getting into as well, carbon capture, green hydrogen, energy storage. And so we really want to make sure that we're building that confidence in the markets, that these are, bankable business models, as well as the technology is ready in order for these to be, have that market uptake. And we want to bring in all the types of things that we've learned at the Department of Energy, having done large scale demonstrations, whether it's offshore wind, whether it's previous carbon capture technologies or the biorefinery type of technologies. We want to bring all those lessons learned in order to form this center of excellence around large scale demos, so that we can make sure that we're providing a consistent approach to due diligence, project management oversight, and kind of the type of data we get out of these projects to build that confidence in the private sector. So this is a bit of a rundown of the 21.5 billion and how it breaks out. We have a huge investment in the clean hydrogen hubs. That notice of intent was released in early June. We have another large investment, 5 billion, in the kind of innovative upgrades to the grids. We're funding 2 existing advanced nuclear reactor projects. Emily has already mentioned the carbon capture demos and pilots, so we have a huge investment there, close to 3.5 billion. We have really unique provisions that really get at communities and really making sure we have an equitable transition to a clean energy future, working with rural and remote areas, as well as developing clean energy on current and former mine lands. I recently came from the Advanced Manufacturing Office, so I know a significant amount of our GHG emissions, nearly a third, come from the industrial sector. So having some investments in reducing emissions from the industrial sector, as well as we know that we need energy storage technologies, are a critical kind of linchpin in achieving a lot of the renewable energy targets on the grid. So I'm really excited about those investments as well. Okay, so here's the website to our new office, as well as if you want to, meet with us one-on-one or want to learn more about the office, feel free to reach out through that email. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. A lot of awesome and exciting work coming out of OSED, so it's great to see that. We do have a bit of time for some Q&A. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to chat them in. Let's see here. Do you ever use a metric of the mass CO2 saved/removed per unit of green energy invested for different proposals?
Do you want Emily to take that one? Or Emily, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, I think the best direction I can give is essentially just to read our funding opportunity announcements really carefully, and those will tell you what metrics we use. It's not something that's kind of consistent across every single program. Obviously, if we're talking about like a carbon dioxide removal proposal, avoided CO2 is not going to play into that, but in some cases it might. So read the thing closely, and that's also just as a flag there too. We generally have places to send in questions, and if you send in a question, we will answer that publicly and post it on a website so that everybody can read it. So you can go see if other people have asked questions. If you ask a question, we'll answer it. So that's another good way to find out specifically on certain of these opportunities. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Emily. And if that is something that I have heard from a couple different doing business with DOE presentations, the first thing they say is always read the whole proposal. Everything you need to know is in the RFP. Next question, how is DOE thinking about innovative unconventional solutions for geologic CO2 sequestration, i.e. non-class 6, non-EOR CO2 storage methods that have yet to be demonstrated at scale?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. And I think that's a lot of the reason why you're starting to hear us talk about conversion rather than utilization for CO2. The part of what we're really trying to do is look for opportunities to essentially store CO2 in value-added products. And that's a big part of the conversion program. For just straight storage that's not also conversion, one of the things that you'll also probably see, and this comes out specifically in things like the energy earth shots, so the carbon negative shot, the hydrogen shot, et cetera, a lot of our programs and our aspirations are performance based. And so if you can demonstrate that a technique is legal, sustainable, just, et cetera, and also store CO2 for 1,000 years or whatever else the metric might be in a particular setting, that's something that we're really interested in. It may not be something that we're funding immediately at kind of the demo scale because we're trying to find things that are really on that cusp of commercialization for a lot of the bill work in particular. But yes, certainly interested in moving toward performance-based standards in those areas.
And a follow-up to that, how is DOE thinking about CO2-based renewable fuels that re-emit captured CO2 but are carbon neutral?
Yeah, also a good question. And I think one of the things that we really focus on is life cycle assessment. So a CO2-based renewable fuel might not actually be carbon neutral. And it really depends on the source of the CO2. It depends on the other inputs. It depends on whether you're making methane along the way, whether you're making N2O along the way, et cetera. So we're moving toward a life cycle basis for a lot of this work. And I think you'll continue to see that language from us. But I think one of the really, Amishi's also mentioning there's another presentation at 2 that will catch you up on this as well. But we are really trying to be very careful to understand the custody of a CO2 molecule. So something like a captured CO2 molecule off of a cement plant that turns into a fuel that's atmospherically positive. An atmospheric unit of CO2 that has no life cycle inputs of other greenhouse gases, which is not where we are at this point, might be carbon neutral, but actually verifying that rather than just assuming SAF is carbon neutral is a big piece of what we're doing.
Great, thank you for all that, Emily. Not seeing any more questions in the chat. So with that, again, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this today. And we will go ahead and move forward with our next speaker, Dr. Catherine Clark, who's a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at FECM. Catherine will discuss societal considerations and impacts, looking at environmental, energy, and climate justice. With that, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just share my screen here. All right, lovely. Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Alex. I'm really excited to be here today and talk with y'all about energy and environmental justice. So in my presentation today, there's really 2 main questions that I hope to cover. And the first is, what do I mean when I say environmental justice, energy justice? And what does that look like in communities today? And then the second piece is, what are DOE's priorities and approach to environmental and energy justice, specifically looking at the Justice 40 initiative, and also touching on some responses we received in a recent request for information on these topics. And really broadly, I'm hoping to provide sort of a basic understanding of what all these pieces mean, but also really motivate this discussion by providing some concrete data to demonstrate that considerations around energy and environmental justice are really specific, evidence-based, and have substantial impacts on people's lives. So with that, let's jump into this first piece, really digging into what is environmental and energy justice. So the environmental justice movement brought out of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And so it has a really long and robust history that mainly focuses on conventional environmental pollution and the corresponding impacts to and harms to health, wealth, and livelihood. A common definition for environmental justice you can see here, which is about the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Now, the 2 bullets at the bottom I think are really important, and I want to touch on these too, because environmental justice really involves both the outcomes. So what's the distribution of benefits and harms? What people, what communities, what areas are actually being impacted in different ways by a certain law, project, regulation, etc. But it also touches on the processes. So the second bullet, equal access to decision-making process. So this is about who has the power to actually make decisions, about things that impact their life. When we think about energy justice, it's similar, but as you may imagine, is focused specifically on energy systems. So here, we're seeking to achieve equity in both the social and economic participation in our energy system specifically, while remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those that have been disproportionately harmed by our energy system. So again, in this energy justice space, you can see these elements of that, outcome piece and the participation or procedural piece. Climate justice, which I won't talk about as in depth today, but just at a high level, at its core, it really applies the same basic principles of civil rights and this distributive justice and procedural justice to the climate space. So what impacts are coming from climate change. And in my next few slides, I'm going to show evidence in all three of these categories. So environmental justice, energy justice, and climate justice, that shows that our systems have not achieved justice in the United States in these spaces. We know, and research shows again and again, that impacts are not equitably distributed, and negative impacts are often concentrated in communities of color and low-income communities, which is really motivating the focus on this and sort of this evidence-based framework that we're going to dig into next.
Catherine, sorry to interrupt. Do you mind just moving a little bit closer to your mic, please?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I'll hold it up. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry if my hand is now awkwardly. That's great. Thanks for that, Alex. Okay, so next I'm going to provide, as I said, sort of three examples, one in each category. And these are just a few examples of sort of recent reports or studies that have come out in this space. There's many more, but I just wanted to really ground this in sort of the data and reality of where we are today. So in the environmental justice space, a study came out recently in March of 2019, looking at fine particulate matter, PM2.5, which is the largest environmental health risk factor in the United States. And this study looked at sort of pollution inequity, which is the difference between the environmental or health damage that's caused by a certain group, by their activities and behaviors, and what's the difference between what's caused and the damage that that group experiences. So the study found that PM2.5 exposure is disproportionately caused by the consumption of goods and services, mainly by the non-Hispanic white majority, but disproportionately inhaled by Black and Hispanic minorities. So Latinx Americans and Black Americans are exposed to 63%, 56% more PM2.5 than they produce, respectively, whereas white Americans are exposed to 17% less PM2.5. So here we're getting at that sort of inequitable distribution of benefits and harms. The next example is in the energy and justice space, and this report from the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy looked at energy burden, which is the percentage of household income spent on home energy bills. And there's a lot of good data in here. I encourage folks to look, but two examples that came out of, or two specific instances that came out of this report are that low-income households spend 3 times more of their income on energy costs compared to the median of non-low-income households. And another example is that the median energy burden for Black and Hispanic households is 43% and 20% higher, respectively, than non-Hispanic white households. The final example that I'll touch on is in the climate space. So this report recently came out from the EPA, looking at social vulnerability in 6 different sort of impact categories, ranging from air quality and health impacts all the way to flooding. And they looked at 4 different groups, and the result of this analysis was that of the 4 socially vulnerable groups examined, minorities are the most likely to live in areas where analysis predict the highest level of climate change impacts. So I hope these 3 examples sort of ground us in not only that this is a data-driven, that the focus on this is data-driven, but also that these have real and substantial impacts on people's daily lives. And so next I'm going to transition into sort of the DOE priorities around advancing energy and environmental justice. And I want to start with the Justice 40 initiative, which was established in January of 2021 with Executive Order 14008. And the Justice 40 initiative establishes a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. Now there's a lot packed into that one clause. So we can sort of break this down into three different areas or buckets. And the first is those 40% of overall benefits. What do we mean by benefits, and how do we track them? The second is what is covered under the Justice 40 initiative in terms of, what kinds of investments and what kinds of activities. And the final piece is how do we define disadvantaged communities? So I'm going to step through each of these in my next slides to just give some more context about what this clause means in the Justice 40 initiative and how we're thinking about it ideally. So let's start with benefits. So first, at a high level, when I say benefits, I mean both direct and indirect investments and program outcomes that can positively impact communities. And these include a wide range of things, from environmental impacts, economic impacts, health, etc. So, any type of benefit. Really the key piece here, the bottom line, is that benefits are not only direct investments, they include other outcomes or impacts as well. To support the Justice 40 initiative, the Department of Energy identified 8 policy priorities that sort of provide some direction and example of types of benefits we can be thinking about. And so these are listed here and include decreasing energy burden. So that's what we were talking about a few slides ago. Decreasing environmental exposure and burden, increasing parity and clean energy technology access, etc. And then one high level thing I want to also clarify here is that 40% of overall benefit statement is about sort of, the overall benefits. And we recognize that individual projects may contribute more or less substantially to this goal based on factors unique to the project. That second bucket was, what's a covered investment? What counts under Justice? Justice 40 initiative applies to programs or projects in categories including climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and critical clean water and waste infrastructure. So that is a lot. It's a broad applicability within all of these categories. The types of covered investments are listed here. I won't read them all, but basically any of these types of investments in these covered programs count under the Justice 40 initiative. And then the last piece that I touched on was the definition of a disadvantaged community. The Department of Energy has created this working definition of a disadvantaged community that includes 36 indicators in the categories of fossil dependence, energy burden, environmental and climate hazards, and vulnerability. And I really encourage folks to go to the websites that I've listed here, which include an interactive map so you can sort of see the definition of disadvantaged communities and tribal lands, and also provides a really in-depth analysis of sort of the methodology and data sets used to construct this definition. Within the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management specifically, in support of all these priorities, our funding opportunities will include requirements on several societal considerations and impacts, which include energy and environmental justice in the Justice 40 initiative, and other pieces like community and stakeholder engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and economic impact and quality jobs. And we'll hear much more detail about the jobs piece from Christy in a few minutes. And additionally, as Emily mentioned right at the top, FECM has a new strategic vision, which highlights advancing justice, labor, and engagement as one of our 3 priority directions. Finally, to support these initiatives, FECM recently had a request for information, or RFI, broadly on carbon management topics, and included a section on environmental justice, engagement, and jobs. And so I wanted to touch on this here to sort of motivate some of our conversation that's going to happen in the breakouts later. 2 of these areas that I want to highlight specifically today are around project impacts. So that's, again, this broad concept of benefits and negative impacts, which can be environmental, health, economic, etc. Our respondents noted that they felt impacts must be assessed for the entire life cycle and specifically for disadvantaged communities. And the respondents to this RFI, so sorry, I should mention these top bullets are a summary of the responses we heard from the RFI. So respondents noted the following impacts, including health and safety concerns, fossil fuel entrenchment, land, water, and energy impacts, job creation and other economic benefits, and potential for remediation and reduction of pollution. They also provided some specific suggestions to DOE to support these topics that were raised. On the engagement side, respondents felt that engagement should be prioritized, specifically with respect to disadvantaged communities and labor throughout all stages of the project, and that engagement must be meaningful, early and frequent, transparent, inclusive, and accessible, and also provided some specific suggestions towards implementing that. So given that information that we've already collected within the RFI, we would love to hear more from y'all today in the breakout sessions. And so I've just sort of put some additional questions here that we would love to cover, including, how have you considered the impacts of your projects, environmental, health, economic, et cetera, and how do you measure those? And do those tools to measure them that you need to do that already exist? And then on the engagement side, how well do you know the groups that are impacted either near your facility or throughout the supply chain? What methods do you use to communicate them, and what is the relationship with those impacted groups? And are there more opportunities for partnership with community organizations? So really looking forward to that discussion. And with that, I'll pass it back to Alex. Thanks so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. It's awesome seeing the work that you're doing on such an incredibly important topic. And it's great to see the focus that it's receiving at DOE. With that, our next speaker is Dr. Christy Beater, Senior Advisor in DOE's Office of Energy Jobs, to discuss enabling energy jobs of the future. And Christy, I believe I am supposed to run your slides, so just give me 1 second here while I pull them up. All right, you should be able to see them now.
Yes, great. Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. I'm very glad to be with you here today. Thank you for having time in your day to include a discussion about energy jobs in the discussion broadly about this very exciting provision on carbon conversion procurement grants. My name is Christy Beater. I'm a senior advisor in DOE's Office of Policy, focusing on job creation, job quality, and job access across all parts of DOE. Next slide, please. If you've heard Secretary Granholm's remarks at any of her public events over the last year and a half, you've very likely heard her talk about the importance of job quality and job creation and job access in the context of everything that DOE does. It's a subject that she talks very enthusiastically and emphatically on, and it's something that we all stand behind her across all program offices here, and also a priority that's very much aligned with the White House's vision on the importance of lifting up working people. Next slide, please, Alex. You've probably also seen the different executive orders that President Biden has issued, emphasizing all different facets of quality jobs in the context of a supply chain, in the context of domestic manufacturing, connecting jobs with, what the federal government and all parts of America are doing to combat the climate crisis. It's something that's woven into all different parts of the White House's priorities, and certainly has been that way ever since the very beginning. Next slide, please. You are going to be hearing a lot more very shortly from Amishi and Aaron about the very, the technical specifics and a lot of the detailed considerations about the carbon conversion procurement grant program. But I think it's worth taking a moment to pull back the camera a bit to share with you this collection of overarching values that DOE is putting into all different parts of our implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that Melissa and Emily spoke about earlier. It is not an overstatement to say that these these very ambitious, far-reaching goals for improving the economy from the macro level to the micro level are things that DOE program offices all across the enterprise are working in a very focused manner to incorporate into our infrastructure law provisions. It's a very unique and special moment at DOE to have the chance to be reaching for the stars, really, in terms of how much we can improve economic circumstances for folks all across America in terms of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I've listed some of the main ones here, starting with funding programs that can enable our economy to become more resilient, equitable, and sustainable. That gets back to all of the ideas that Catherine was describing for you, and also gets back to the White House's priorities around how a transition to a clean energy economy can take place in a way that makes our economy stronger overall and also more equitable for all the different communities and people that make up the United States. Enhancing US competitiveness internationally is also a really important part of that. We want to be making sure we can compete robustly with all different kinds of companies around the world. Diversifying regional economies, especially around manufacturing and supply chain, is something that is especially important in the current geopolitical climate, and connects back to other actions that the White House and DOE is taking to strengthen our efforts around supply chain resilience. Improving the way that these economic benefits from all of these different efforts are shared with underserved communities, with rural communities, with communities that are experiencing transitions away from coal and other fossil fuels to clean energy technologies. This is something that must be robustly represented in how we're doing our work in these different programs. And we think that there's certainly room, for really interesting opportunities here in the context of the carbon conversion grants. And of course, supporting the creation of good jobs with a free and fair choice to join a union is an essential foundational part of pursuing all the other bullets on this slide. It doesn't take more than a moment's reflection in looking at all these different ideas to realize that they're all very closely connected with each other. Achieving these interlocking goals is really important in the context of current world events. All of these things have been important for a long time leading up to this moment. They're all going to continue to be important for DOE for a long time to come. All of you may know DOE has a very long and storied history and reputation as a research and development agency. You're now working very hard to make sure that our work in terms of economic revitalization, economic resilience, and job creation is as strong and robust as our work in research and development. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide just a little context to illustrate how, where are some of the opportunities around creating good manufacturing jobs? What are some things to consider in the context of jobs in the manufacturing sector? This is data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data that was presented by Pew recently. The yellow line shows the changes in real hourly wages averaged across the US economy from the mid-1960s to several years ago. And the green line shows that number adjusted for inflation over the same period of time. And when you look at the inflation adjusted line, you can see that there were some higher points in the 70s and some lower points in the 90s. But what's really interesting is the fact that, aside from those relatively minor variations, there's been very little change in purchasing power in terms of people's paychecks over the last several decades. And this actually is not evenly distributed for all earners. For folks in the top 10% or so of earnings, their purchasing power has actually increased by over 15% over this time period. However, for folks in the bottom 10% or 25% of wages, those wages over this period of time have only increased in the small single digits. So there are certainly lots of opportunities, generally speaking, in terms of hourly wages, for things to improve in such a way as to make different jobs in different parts of the economy more attractive for workers overall. Next slide, please. This other time series gets into that question a little bit more. This shows very similar Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Again, the blue line shows total average hourly wages across the economy for non-supervisory workers. The orange line shows that same number just for manufacturing sector jobs, and the gray line shows the same number for the subset of manufacturing jobs that cover durable goods. And as you can see, for most of the same time period from about the mid 70s until about the Great Recession, there was a wage premium that manufacturing workers enjoyed, whereby those workers were doing significantly better than the average hourly wage worker in the US economy. That wage premium was even more pronounced for folks working in the manufacturing sector producing durable goods. Those workers enjoyed a much greater wage period over all other, the general across economy average overall for a longer period of time. But even for those workers that had such a wage advantage, around 2015, that wage premium eroded, and right now those workers are also about the same or less than the total private sector average in terms of wages. So the one of the significant factors that was attracting workers to manufacturing jobs for a long period of time has now gone away. And I think a really worthwhile and notable question going forward for the manufacturing sector is, to what degree can that wage premium be recreated, creating a renewing the source of motivation for workers to go into the manufacturing sector. Next slide, please. In addition to the premium or the comparative advantage that manufacturing jobs have relative to other jobs in the US economy in terms of earning power, there are also significant questions, and this doesn't certainly apply just to manufacturing, but questions around gender and racial wage gaps. And I'm sure many of you have heard about these type of wage gaps in other parts of the economy broadly. They certainly exist in the manufacturing sector as well. As you can see in this graphic, this shows women's earnings as a percentage of men's earnings for jobs in a number of different parts of the economy. And the red circle shows the manufacturing sector. And as you can see, on average, women in the manufacturing sector earn about 75% of what men earn. Some of that very likely has to do with the fact that women are more likely to have jobs that are administrative or secretarial in the manufacturing sector. This information, I think, highlights the potential to provide opportunities and support and encouragement for women to enter more higher paying jobs, more higher paying manufacturing jobs, and find ways to improve pay equity across gender lines overall. Next slide, please. There is also, abundant documentation and historical research for racial wage gaps in all different parts of the economy. You certainly don't have to scratch too far beneath the surface to find evidence of racial wage gaps also in the manufacturing sector. This is current population survey data, also published, aggregated and put into graphic form by Pew Research Center. showing how white men earn more than all other workers, women and men, with the exception of Asian men, in terms of median hourly earnings. This is not specific to the manufacturing sector, but very likely similar patterns exist in manufacturing as well. I didn't want to have too many slides for this presentation, but this is data from 2015. And these patterns, what you see here on this slide is also representative of racial pay disequities that go back into the 1980s and certainly earlier, if data probably would have been available then. So anyway, I show this to illustrate some of the opportunities for increasing equity in terms of manufacturing jobs and jobs generally, but for the purposes of our discussion, manufacturing, and creating more incentives, more encouragements for all different kinds of workers to enter into those jobs, so we can have a robust, diverse, inclusive manufacturing workforce doing the very important work that all of your companies do. Next slide, please. To shift focus a bit to talk about specific workforce goals and priorities around the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provisions and including carbon conversion procurement grants, DOE is looking for all different kinds of ways to encourage the creation of good quality jobs with competitive wages and access for all different kinds of workers in all different parts of bipartisan infrastructure law implementation. Some of the main things that we're looking to encourage and lift up is the incorporation of robust labor standards in jobs that are created through the bipartisan infrastructure law. This covers things like really good health and safety standards, so workers feel confident that they're going to be able to do their jobs without getting hurt or injured. And then, and if that does happen, that there are good ways to help them recover from those injuries. Predictable work schedules so that workers can take care of their families in the other parts of their lives as well as do their job well. Clear processes of dispute resolution would certainly also fall under this category as well, so that workers can know that there are fair ways for them to address issues when challenges arise in their work. Workforce development is also a really essential part of this. We know that it's a very tight labor market right now, and doing everything that we can to encourage folks to enter into these jobs and provide them with the training and supports that can help them be successful is really terrific and something that we want to promote as much as possible, especially improving job access for workers that have been historically underrepresented in different jobs, women, veterans, returning citizens, people of color. We want everybody to be able to have a solid shot at this work. Also, training programs like apprenticeships, where you can be learning while you're on the job and, in some cases, getting a mix of classroom training and on-the-job learning. Those are an excellent way to help folks get launched into new careers and are often really well complemented by quality pre-apprenticeship programs, which prepare workers for success once they enter an apprenticeship and provide wraparound services like childcare, substance abuse counseling, transportation assistance for workers that may not easily be able to get to and from their work sites, things of this nature. And of course, as much as possible, encouraging competitive wages for the jobs that are supported through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and also making sure that all workers have the free and fair chance to join a union to make sure that worker voice and worker empowerment is really being incorporated into everything that's happening through our infrastructure law provisions. Next slide, please. Catherine spoke about in her discussion of the RFI responses that FECM received. Jobs were mentioned in there. We're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on workforce questions in the breakout sessions that are going to be coming up. Any thoughts that you have to share about forecasts for what your workforce needs are going to be looking like in the coming months and years? Any perspectives you have on how you see quality job creation looking like at your company? What kinds of things could better support you in achieving that? What challenges and opportunities are you facing? All of these things will be very, very important for us to understand in the context of everything else that's going to be taking place around the rollout of this provision. So thank you for considering that, and we're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts when we do the breakout groups.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and to go through that. I think, as I mentioned in the last workshop, I come from a union family, so definitely appreciate the work on a personal level there as well. With that, we are going to move into our next set of presentations with our fearless leader for this effort, Amishi Claros, who is FECM's Carbon Conversion Program Manager, and Joe Stofa, who is a technology manager at the National Energy Technology Laboratory. They will discuss the importance of responsible carbon conversion for decarbonization and give a strategic vision and programmatic update, look at enabling technologies and facilities, including LCAs, TEAs, and testing facilities, and then give an overview of the FECM bill provisions, and assuming we have time left over, we'll take some Q&A from our whole last set of speakers. So with that, Amishi and Joe, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. I will turn it over. Hi, everyone. My name is Amishi. I'm actually going to turn it over to Joe to carry us through the first overview of the R&D program that we have thus far. And then I'll talk to you guys in the second half of this presentation. But here is your second fearless leader, Joe Stofa.
Hi, thanks, Amishi, for that introduction. And are you able to see the slides and me okay?
Yep, we can see you. You sound great. And the slides look good.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So thanks everybody for joining today. I'm going to start with a overview of the strategic vision for the carbon conversion program, as well as a programmatic update, and then Amishi will lead into some IIJA updates. So what is the mission of the carbon conversion program? Well, I guess maybe we should start with the larger mission of demonstrate and ultimately deploy carbon management technologies. And also, we know there are a lot of externalities associated with fossil fuels, so mitigating those in a just and sustainable way, with the goal of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. Within the program itself, we're trying to economically transform CO2 into products in an environmentally conscious manner, and also moving technologies through higher scales of demonstration, ultimately leading to deployment. So we know that, out of 10 things tried in the laboratory, probably one only makes it to some sort of demonstration phase, and then probably 1 out of 10 of those make it out into the real world. So having some of this intermediate test systems to support some higher TRL testing is something we've tried to support in the program through support of NCCC and other testing centers. The drivers are the total CO2 global emissions. In the US, we have over 5 gigatons, worldwide over 33 gigatons. And the issue with carbon conversion technology right now is there's not sufficient technology out there to economically transform anywhere near the amount of CO2 emitted. So if you look at the annual demand for CO2, it's equivalent to a few days worth of annual emissions, and most of that is for enhanced oil recovery. So there's still a lot of work to be done. That leads us into the challenges. The biggest one is the scale of CO2 emissions relative to conversion technologies. There's also a challenge with qualifying economic viability and environmental impact. So it's relatively easy to quantify technical viability You can have a group of engineers get together and review an idea or an application, spend one day on it, and you generally know if it's technically feasible, but the economic viability and environmental impact are much harder to assess. There's also a challenge that I'll go into a little bit more detail later with the availability and carbon footprint of the energy inputs. So if we're not talking about mineralization technologies or CO2 uses that are energetically downhill, we're going to have to add energy to the CO2 that'll be in the form of either electricity or hydrogen. So what are the availability and price of those in the future? That's a big unknown to plan around. And that's just kind of summed up by the Yogi Berra quote that it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So what is within the scope of the carbon conversion program? That's what the little circle and stick diagram is representing. So we look at biological uptake by algae and bioproducts, although we specifically exclude biological uptake by algae for production of fuel, as that's the mandate of EERE's BETO, so we don't fund work in that area. We also have conversion that could be into fuels and chemicals, as well as solid carbons. So we'll cover some of that work briefly later. And then finally mineralization, converting CO2, either mineralizing rocks for use in aggregates or actual curing of cement, just any mineralization reaction. And we have circled here on the lower right of that diagram the use of CO2 as a working fluid. And that's the focus of other programs. So we are not interested in CO2 for enhanced oil recovery or for supercritical power cycles and such. Over on the right side is just a bar chart of the funding that has been received in the program since inception. I came on board as technology manager about 3 years ago, so not taking credit for the increase, definitely, but it has been increasing in the last few years. And in the 3 years I've been in this position, I've received more calls and emails within the past year than I have in the first 2 years. So there's been a lot of growing interest in this program. I have over 40 projects within the program portfolio across the 3 conversion pathways discussed earlier. Most of these come from funding opportunity announcements. So our FOAs, these results in cooperative agreements, they're competitively awarded. We also have some grants through programs such as SBIR and STTR where we fund R&D. And then we have agreements with national labs, which are field work proposals, as well as other mechanisms to fund work. Some of you may be familiar with the TCF, University Training Research, and ACT. So these projects within the portfolio, they support many different products, concrete, whether that's the cement, the aggregate, or the curing. We have work on CO2 to polymers, CO2 to fuels and chemicals, work on algae to animal feed. We support R&D in that area, as well as production of solid carbon products. Some of the big hits within the program that I like to highlight is we were the first DOE program, and maybe only to support the UCLA X Prize winning technology. So that was 1 out of 2 winners from 47 submissions. And we have a nice little quote there from our director at NETL, Brian Anderson. So just very proud of supporting that. We're also supporting some R&D in new areas such as reactive capture and conversion. So typically in the capture process, there's a regeneration step where you're trying to separate the CO2 from the sorbent or solvent, and that tends to be an energy expensive step. So we're looking at directly using loaded sorbents or solvents in the production of the product. So that way you avoid that expensive regeneration step, but there is some disadvantage there with obviously you need a less expensive sorbent or solvent. So that's something we've supported through fieldwork proposals within the past year. We have a lot of collaboration with multiple stakeholders in the program. Misha really does a wonderful job here of reaching out to other departments and offices just to ensure we're all aware of what others are working on, and ensure we have an understanding of what's necessary with regards to certain products. So I mentioned that we support R&D into using algae as an animal feed. Animal feed is not something there's a lot of expertise within DOE on that subject. So we have to speak to some of the other departments to know what's required, what's that approval process look like, and what kind of questions do we have to ensure that recipients are answering. So there's a lot of collaboration required. I wanted to print out some of the funding possibilities this year. So we have FOA 2614, which I believe is currently open, and then 2654, which was an FECM funded topic area under the EERE BETO FOA release. And then we also have SBIR topics periodically as well that I encourage everybody to keep an eye out for. So I'll briefly move on to some of the enabling technologies and facilities. First, I wanted to just give a brief overview of NETL, since we may have some people online that aren't totally familiar with what we do at the lab here. So NETL is a little bit different in that we are the only government-owned, government-operated national lab. All of the other national labs are contractor-operated. So the big distinction here is that NETL is involved heavily in activities that are considered inherently federal functions. So in addition to my role as a technology manager, there's also a large project management team here that's funding the cooperative agreements once they're placed. There's also a finance and acquisition center that's negotiating these agreements and putting them into place. So there are a lot of inherently federal functions housed at NETL, and the workforce is about half federal and half contractor. The NETL mission is written up there. It's just ensuring affordable, abundant, and reliable energy that drives a robust economy and national security. So we want to be the premier energy technology laboratory and be able to deliver integrated solutions to the problems we're facing today. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that occurs in-house at NETL. So we have a life cycle analysis team and techno-economic analysis team. So before, when I had mentioned some of the inherently federal functions that are kind of outside of what a normal national lab is involved in, we also have the more traditional national lab work, and that's where the LCA and TEA work occurs. So LCA, we know that's vital to determining the environmental impact. Some of the challenges there are working to harmonize that LCA methodology. So we try to maintain activity in international CCU assessment harmonization group, just to ensure that if multiple LCA teams look at a technology, they'll come to a similar conclusion with regards to whether or not it's a significant improvement over the current state of the art. We also have a TEA team at NETL. We know that all successful technologies must add value. It's not enough to be technically viable and have a good environmental impact. There must also be a creative business decision there. Obviously these analyses are dependent upon many future unknowns, and as I had mentioned previously, not as straightforward as qualifying technical viability. So what is life cycle assessment? It's just there to help us make a better decision on how significant the improvements are with respect to the existing state of the art. So it's the traditional cliche of cradle to grave with regards to CO2 emissions, and just trying to calculate the impact of that. Okay, touching briefly on the necessity for an uncertain future. So I kind of think about it as there being three broad future energy scenarios. There's the scenario that tomorrow looks a lot like today. In this case, we continue to have a mix of fossil, renewable, and nuclear resources with slight changes in how much power is coming from each, and industrial electricity prices around 60 to 80 per megawatt hour. Then we also have the energy future of inexpensive and abundant hydrogen. If you believe in DOE Earthshot as I do, we could have inexpensive hydrogen within a decade. That's obviously a much less expensive energy input, so that would favor thermochemical conversion of CO2 and also help with industry-wide decarbonization, especially in steel, cement, and fertilizer, which are some of the harder industries to decarbonize. And then finally, we have the Techno Cornucopian worldview. This is the worldview that says that within a decade, we're well on our way to being a 100% wind solar battery system, and electricity becomes extremely inexpensive. Everything that can be electrified is electrified. This is obviously favorable for electrochemical approaches to conversion and decarbonization of many transportation sectors. So with TEA and LCA, TEA especially, we have to plan around some of these future unknowns. What scenario is going to occur? We have to track that over the next decade. Also some concern over the other unknowns, which are listed below. So what's the price or credit associated with carbon? What happens to direct air capture cost? Obviously, if direct air capture costs go low enough, then maybe the calculus says, business as usual plus clean up the CO2 later is the preferred approach for some problems, not all, obviously. And then what other energy breakthroughs are out there, whether that's perovskite solar cells or extremely inexpensive electrochemical battery storage for grid scale. So lots of unknowns out there that we need to plan around and consider. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Amishi. We'll save questions for the end, but then we'll try to tag team the questions as best we can.
Thank you so much, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
Awesome. Thanks. Yes, everyone, like what Joe just delivered is very hard to do. So I appreciate that foundation deeply. Can we go to the next slide, Joe? So these set of slides, like mentioned before, are really going to focus in on that IIJA component of the program. So best place to start is actually that IIJA language. And if you go to section 40302, you'll be able to see it in all of its glory. First thing you might notice is the section 40302 says Carbon Utilization Program. Something you may have also noticed is Joe said a lot of carbon conversion. So there's a little discrepancy I just want to address first and foremost. This R&D program that we've invested so deeply in, things, for the last decade, really focusing on that technology pipeline to convert that CO2 with algae or mineralize it or use it in catalytic conversion or something. That is this R&D program that has taken multiple names. It was carbon use and reuse, it was carbon utilization, probably for a longer bit, and now it's officially called carbon conversion. That being said, it's still the overarching program, and even if SE or the section 40302 references carbon utilization, it's explicitly calling out this program that's really butted in the carbon management office between capture and storage and really looking at different ways to use that CO2. So I just want to get that locked in right off the gate. So let's just dive into the language. You can probably tell I've truncated it a little bit because it sounds like a lawyer wrote it. But it says right now, this program directs the secretary to establish a program for eligible entities. We'll dive into what eligible entities can be, but it's the first boundary condition or direction that Congress explicitly gave us. But this program is established for eligible entities to submit an application. An eligible entity can then receive a grant to procure and use commercial or industrial products. All right, that's the second thing. We are establishing now that the eligible entities themselves will receive the money to procure and also use. So it's not just like a carbon offset or anything like that. It's actual viable product with economic value to the eligible entity to consume and procure it. And now we have the two subsequent bullet points there that kind of dive into these products themselves, kind of gives us boundary conditions on what we can help provide procurement grants for. The first is Products must use or are derived from anthropogenic carbon oxides. I will dive into that. We can go into a bit more of that later, but just taking a step back, this R&D program that Joe went into detail about, and about the Carbon Management Office in general, when it was FE, fossil energy, we looked at explicitly carbon dioxide, even more so carbon dioxide from fossil fuel plants. We have steadily been expanding the scope of carbon dioxides that we use. And right now, the R&D portfolio is explicitly looking at carbon dioxides from like a pretty agnostic perspective of carbon dioxides. We're looking at it from the air, directly from industrial emissions, from fossil fuel power plants, from heavy industry as well. The one thing that's off the table is mined carbon dioxide. We're going to be using that exact same perspective, but expanding it not just to carbon dioxide, but also carbon monoxide. So this can also then include, emissions from steel gas production. But mined carbon oxides now are still off the table. So that's just a little bit on anthropogenic carbon oxides. Whew, I'll be careful not to say carbon dioxide. The second bullet is that commercial or industrial products must demonstrate a significant net reduction in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to incumbent technologies, processes, or products. This was also a very great boundary condition that, that Congress wrote in. So when we're looking at this life cycle greenhouse gas emission, we have read to be an LCA analysis. Also, comparing it to an incumbent technologies, process, or product creates not, like an arbitrary benchmark that we need to, or goalposts we need to reach in terms of reduction or net reduction or anything like that. It allows our counterfactual, or what we compare against, to be the business as usual, or how that product, that commercial or industrial product, is created today or manufactured today. If you look at and I'll go a little bit deeper on the next slide on a couple of things, but if you look at that link on the bottom, it actually has the blown out language embedded into the Energy Act of 2020. I think it's a lot easier to read. And if you don't leverage that website, please now you know. I would use it more often if you find yourself in a place where you're reading a lot of legislative text. A great place to be, I can assure you. But this is a fantastic program and a bit of a deviation. We've really, as Joe mentioned, the last decade, and especially in the last few years, really leaned into that enabling technology space, that developing technology R&D. But this is the complete shift. We are now looking at it from the market side, and improving market demand and increasing purchasing power theoretically will help our R&D program deploy more technologies. But there is an underlying assumption that we do need to establish. We're assuming that there is a flowing pipeline of deployment ready technologies. So there is that assumption that we need to keep in mind whenever we're developing a very market-driven, market pull program. Also, we've understood that subsidizing the premiums can help secure off-takers. We understand, and it's been told to us through various outreach, that there is a premium associated with carbon oxide-based products, and subsidizing that premium will help secure those off-takers and eventually improve financing options, which are really important for deploying not just a singular technology but an industry. How about that next slide that I've talked about a couple times? Let's see the money. I know the money is one of the most critical points that we would like to discuss. The IIJA language actually laid out roughly 310 million over these 5 years, divvied up for us. And it's the other important thing to note is that this aggregate sum of money was attributed to that program level. So the money actually goes to the carbon utilization program or carbon conversion program. Funding specifically then could be used for either an R&D programmatic purpose or for something detailed in IIJA, such as this demonstration procurement grant program. So the funding level as it's the funding level divisions and amounts will be weighted against programmatic priorities and interest that is exhibited in all of these programs explicitly. This carbon procurement, sustainable procurement grants. We envision it. We can say some things, pretty point blank. We do not envision this to be a static number. We hope that the procurement grant program actually increases as if it's successful. We want it to grow in the future. So I think it's important just to establish the funding levels associated with the procurement grants will be flexible. The next point that's really important to mention is it says demonstration in italics. So why do we put that in there? Demonstration actually has a strong, it has some connotations behind it and some rules. The demonstration has a connotation that there is a 50% cost share. So at least 50% of the project or the product, in this case, the carbon monoxide product, has to be paid for by recipients or non-federal funds. So DOE share will cover at most 50% of the carbon conversion product, sorry. So for an example, if like a school is being built with low carbon concrete, DOE can provide grants to an eligible entity, say a local school or a local government system, and it will reimburse about 50%. Since this is a demonstration grant, DOE will not be able to reimburse things or provide procurement grants for like GA, design, planning, construction, any additional costs associated with actually leveraging and utilizing that conversion program. So that's another point to keep in mind when you're looking at demonstration grants. Finally, let's dig a little bit real quick into the types of eligible entities. They're listed there. This is what the language itself said. I think one point worth mentioning here is that public utilities can also include tribal utilities. So we have a very delineated list of who we're going to of who can actually apply to our program. This is a virtual workshop. This is the second of the virtual workshops that are really dedicated to the producers or the manufacturers of the products. So you'll see in the breakout groups, we're really gearing our questions to understanding, how you all engage with sustainable procurement. We will be having a set of regional workshops, which Alex can give you the link for, I believe, later at the end. And we will be actually going to target our eligible entities more so in our regional workshops rather than the folks that, such as you all, that are more based in the production or the manufacturing of the carbon oxide products. So that's just a little bit about our outreach to those intended targets. And finally, I want to end on something that's a little bit probably the most impactful for this group. The language explicitly called out net reduction in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. So this has a lot of meaning and significance. According to the program, we will need to have LCA in some fashion. One objective for our outreach, like some outreach we've done before within the RFI, and also hopefully in the breakout discussions, is to gain stakeholder perspective on how to leverage life cycle analysis for carbon conversion. I highly recommend you dig in and provide detailed feedback if possible. We want to establish the program by November, and we will be having more details available later once we have obtained our feedback regarding our LCA. Next slide, Joe. This is just a little bit about some of our LCA tools that we have to help give you guys a starting point, a deeper dive into our starting point on how the program thus far has really approached life cycle analysis. What you see on the right is this really pretty website. It's a toolkit. The toolkit is available at that link shown below. And the toolkit has a lot of, as you would imagine, tools. If you start on the left on the upper corner, that's actually a guidance document. So it is a guidance document, second version now, that we've created to help the R&D program assess R&D projects and applications and tools and methodology on how to, do their final report. With that comes a slew of other tools. You have an open LCA database, and contribution tool, report templates that are very handy, and also an Excel-based tool that can help people import and translate the results that they may be using from whatever program into this open LCA. And there's also training resources available. That's on the upper right side. If you are unfamiliar with how we look at LCA within the program or some of these methodologies, I would highly encourage taking a deeper dive, especially through the training resources available, and also looking around. There's a very similar methodology that we're working with alongside in the Global CO2 Initiative, and I highly recommend checking that out. Again, this is for our R&D program. What you see in the right middle is this blue button. And that's actually the 45Q addendum and tools. IRS preamble in the latest issue or update that IRS issued for the 45Q. In the preamble, they explicitly called out this toolkit for the LCA methodology that should be used for evaluating their products or evaluating an application, application's LCA, pardon. Didn't complete that sentence. And that is actually an addendum. It's a read along. So you'll have your guidance document, and then you can have your 45Q to help you read the guidance document as you should when applying for 45Q. They'll have some changes, especially into your CO2 source, how to use that, to your background data, your benchmarks, your baseline, and your counterfactuals. There's a couple other changes as well, but it goes to show, and it goes to elaborate on the point that your LCA is really dependent upon the market or the purpose that you're applying it for. So, in the case with the program, this guidance document, this V2 as it is, helps us compare applications. For our LCA toolkit for 45Q, it's different because it helps create a consistent evaluation methodology for determining whether or not this an application conformed and did conform to the methodology and did it consistently when compared to other applications. So once again, LCA is very crucial in this game and deeply important on the application in which it'd be used. So let's talk about this application process. That's the next slide. Thank you, Joe. So the preliminary LCA process will be looking like this. Again, it is preliminary and up for some change, but we want to give a breakdown of what we're thinking in case it can help facilitate more meaningful discussion during the breakouts. The first step is the product manufacturer, aka the targeted stakeholders for this meeting, would complete an LCA in accordance to a guidance and submit it for review for their eligible product. We will then review the manufacturer's LCA. We are not looking for, or we know that we cannot establish accuracy. We understand data. With more data comes more accuracy and more details, and it keeps that draconian level of understanding will only get better with time. But we know we cannot establish that you will create the absolute right number with this exact methodology. Rather, what we are trying to do is create some guidances that we can, universally establish a way of evaluating these applications. So when we are reviewing an application, we will judge, did it conform to the guidance and the guidelines provided? Once we can establish it has done that, we are looking to see that there's a minimum of a 10% improvement over that business as usual case or that counterfactual that I mentioned before. That creates that significance as mentioned prior. Once we give you the green light, that green stamp, that you have been approved, you did the LCA as you should, you then get added to a list of approved vendors. Now, hopefully, eligible entities can engage these approved suppliers, these approved vendors, and they will establish a purchase agreement, which will be the driving component in the application for the procurement grants. All right, that's just a little bit on the LCA component. Joe, could I have the next slide, please? I want to just dig a little bit into the data we've already seen. This is just a breakdown of the RFI. Catherine talked about it previously. We had about 52 respondents, total respondents. A lot came from industry. We are hoping to therefore engage, regionally with a lot more eligible entities such as state and local governments or nonprofits or smaller groups. Can we go to the next slide? I actually want to take the last few minutes to dig in. Thanks, Joe. All right, so this is a little snapshot of the information that we've received thus far and we've been responsive to. The first point under funding and business models was the fact that there are high premiums, and we understand that there is an unattractive business case that comes with creating carbon dioxide or carbon oxide based products. Something that was very helpful was also that second bullet. Respondents expressed the uncertainty on 45Q causing investment hesitation. So I want to dig into that a little bit more. It wasn't just 45Q isn't enough. Folks described what about 45Q was holding them back, that uncertainty factor, the magnitude of 45Q, the timing in which you receive it. Those details were very helpful in us understanding what could be, what were your explicit hurdles and how those could potentially be addressed via this mechanism. Respondents also talked a little bit about engagement and mentioned federal outreach from the program should happen on various levels, which was addressed in the variety of stakeholder meetings that we've been having. Product codes and standards was another large area of of feedback. And it was really centered around the need for, and a lack thereof currently, of a current standard practice to measure, quantify, or report on the carbon footprint, aka the LCA of a product or technology. There's no verification system, and that needs to be remedied before folks or product developers can obtain or qualify for a low carbon certification or receive any support for these products. Finally, I'm just going to breeze through the technology section. This was just a summary of the types of technologies that did respond to the RFI. We had a variety of TRL levels, so technology readiness levels, but as anticipated, many of the technology levels were lower because this is a budding and a nascent technology space. Major commercialization is expected, or folks expected, for it to commence in the early 2030s. But that was also riding on the availability of increased funding, incentives, and policy to support that scale up in commercialization. Finally, next slide. We have some additional references. This is another management workshop that was really based on the broader engagement of stakeholders applying for all of the carbon management bill-related FOAs we've been working on, 4 hours long, but packed full of really good info. And there's the toolkit again. And the final slide, I promise, is just the contact information for those involved in this program. We have myself, Mishi, we have Joe. Outreach is done by Aaron Fuller. He will be leading that regional outreach that I've mentioned. And Greg Cooney has been instrumental in leading the LCA development alongside many others at NETL and others in DOE offices like ERE, BETO, Ian. There's been a ton of folks that are behind the scenes on this. But please feel free to direct any questions you may have at Joe and I.
Great, thank you so much, Mishi. Thank you, Joe. We do have a minute or two here to take a couple of questions if anyone wants to enter them into the chat. While we wait for that to happen, we're gonna put up a quick poll. Michelle, if you don't mind bringing that up, that would be great. Just 3 or 4 quick questions that we'd like all of our attendees to answer if possible. Amishi, just kind of following up on your contact information. I know I've received kind of some offline requests of, you know, whether or not people could schedule time with you and Joe to have, you know, some kind of chats about their work. Is it all right if they just reach out to you guys?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's not any formal process for submitting meeting requests with you.
Not yet. No one's abused it.
Perfect.
Yeah, no formal process, but I'll add that you know, I probably won't be able to meet if an FOA is currently open and your idea is responsive to that.
Mhm.
That makes total sense, and thank you for clarifying that, Joe. Not seeing any other questions come in. I believe, Michelle, can you confirm that the poll's been up? For whatever reason, Zoom doesn't show it on my end.
Yep, the poll's up. People are answering.
Okay, perfect. So with that, we will go ahead and we're going to go ahead and skip our break and just move straight into the breakout rooms. The majority of you have been pre-assigned to breakout rooms. So I'm going to open them and you should receive a message on your screen asking you to join the breakout room that you've been assigned to. A few of you may have registered after we had assigned the rooms. So I will go ahead and assign you right now.